The sound came first as a whisper, then as something far worse. Deep in the narrow corridor of stone that carved through the endless dunes, Maya pressed her back against sun-scorched rock and listened to the desert breathe. It wasn't wind. Wind, she knew. Wind had rhythm, purpose, the logic of air moving across open space. This was different. This was deliberate. A low, rhythmic susurration that seemed to pulse from beneath the sand itself, rising and falling like lungs expanding in some massive chest buried just below the surface. And with each cycle, each terrible breath, it was getting closer. The desert pass stretched before her like a throat of stone, walls rising 30 feet on either side, their surfaces carved smooth by centuries of wind and sand. She had entered it 3 hours ago, desperate for shade, for any relief from the relentless sun that had turned the open dunes into a furnace of white heat and shimmering mirages. The pass had seemed like salvation then. Now it felt like a trap. Her canteen hung nearly empty at her hip, the last mouthful of warm water sloshing with each movement. Her lips were cracked, split in places that bled when she tried to wet them. The tactical vest she wore, once dark green, had faded to a dusty gray under weeks of sun exposure. Beneath it, her shirt clung to her skin with dried sweat and grit. Maya's eyes scanned the pass ahead, calculating. The corridor twisted and turned, snaking through the rock formation for what looked like another half-mile before opening onto the dunes again. Behind her, the way she'd come stretched empty, but that breathing sound continued to rise from somewhere in that direction, somewhere among the rocks and shadows. She could feel it now, not just hear it. A vibration in the stone at her back, subtle but unmistakable, like standing near a massive engine running just below audible range. Her right hand moved automatically to the knife at her belt, fingers wrapping around the worn leather grip. The blade had served her well in the 3 weeks since the convoy attack, since she'd been separated from the research team, since the desert had swallowed her colleagues and left her alone in this ocean of sand and stone. She'd used it to dig for water beneath dried creek beds, to pry open the shells of desert beetles for their moisture, to defend herself against a pack of wild dogs that had tracked her for 2 days through the dunes. But against whatever was making that sound, whatever was breathing beneath the sand, she wasn't sure a knife would mean anything at all. The breathing grew louder, not faster, but deeper, more pronounced, as if whatever produced it was drawing closer to the surface. Maya pushed off from the rock wall and began moving forward through the pass, her boots scuffing against sand that had drifted into the corridor over countless years. The temperature here was marginally cooler than the open desert, but still well over 100 degrees. Heat radiated from every surface, turning the air thick and heavy. Her shadow stretched long and thin ahead of her, cast by the sun that blazed directly overhead, turning the sky a pale, washed-out blue that hurt to look at. Every 20 paces, she stopped to listen. The breathing followed her, maintaining its steady rhythm, but definitely closer now. She could hear the individual grains of sand shifting, cascading over themselves in that terrible approximation of respiration. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, echoing off the rock walls in ways that made it impossible to pinpoint. Was it behind her? To the side? Beneath her feet? The uncertainty was worse than knowing. Maya's training kicked in despite the fear coiling in her gut. She was a geologist, specialized in desert formations and underground aquifer systems. The research team had been mapping ancient water sources beneath the Sahara's western edge when the attack came. Raiders, desperate men with guns and no mercy, had descended on their camp at dawn. She'd been on early survey duty, a mile from base camp, when she heard the gunfire. By the time she made it back, everyone was gone, or dead, the vehicles burned, the equipment scattered and destroyed. She'd salvaged what she could carry and started walking, following old map coordinates toward what should have been a research station 200 miles north. That was 3 weeks ago. The research station had been abandoned, its walls half buried in sand, its supplies long since looted or destroyed by the elements. She'd rested there for 2 days, rationing the little food she had left, before continuing north toward what might be civilization. The desert had other plans. A sandstorm hit on the 3rd day, forcing her to take shelter in a depression between dunes for 16 hours while the world turned to howling brown chaos. When it passed, her compass was gone, blown away or buried. The sun became her only guide, And the sun was a liar in this place, bending light and distance into impossible shapes. The breathing sound pulled her back to the present. It was definitely louder now, and she could hear something else beneath it. A scraping, sliding sound, like something massive pushing through packed sand. Maya's pace quickened. The pass began to narrow ahead, the walls closing in until they were barely 15 feet apart. Her heart hammered against her ribs. If whatever was out there caught her in this bottleneck, there would be no room to maneuver, no space to run. She broke into a jog, ignoring the protest of muscles that had been pushed beyond exhaustion days ago. Her left ankle, sprained in a fall 2 days back, sent sharp spikes of pain up her leg with each step. She gritted her teeth and pushed through it. Behind her, the breathing intensified. The scraping grew louder, and then she heard something new, a low, resonant sound, almost like a groan, that seemed to vibrate through the very rock of the pass itself. The walls opened slightly ahead, creating a small widening in the corridor, where a massive boulder had fallen centuries ago, creating a raised platform about 6 feet off the ground. Maya scrambled up onto it, her boots slipping on the smooth stone before finding purchase. From this vantage point, she could see back down the pass the way she'd come. What she saw made her blood run cold. The sand was moving. Not drifting or blowing, but moving with purpose, bulging upward in a wave that traveled along the floor of the pass like something swimming just beneath the surface. The wave was easily 12 feet across, displacing sand in ripples that spread outward and upward against the walls. And it was coming straight toward her, following the exact path she'd taken through the corridor. Maya's mind raced. Underground creatures weren't uncommon in deserts. She'd studied species of rodents, reptiles, even certain insects that spent their entire lives beneath the sand, surfacing only to hunt or mate, but nothing that size. Nothing that could displace that much material. The academic part of her brain, the part trained to observe and document, wanted to understand what she was seeing. The survival part, the part that had kept her alive for 3 weeks in hell, was screaming at her to run. She jumped down from the boulder on the far side, landing hard and feeling her ankle nearly give way. Gasping, she caught herself against the rock wall and kept moving. The pass continued to twist ahead, and she could see sunlight reflecting off sand in the distance, marking where it opened back onto the dunes. Freedom, or at least the illusion of it. 200 yards, maybe less. The breathing sound was right behind her now. She risked a glance back and immediately wished she hadn't. The bulge in the sand had reached the boulder, and as she watched, something broke the surface. At first, she thought it was a rock, some dark outcropping pushing up from below. Then it moved, and she realized with horror that she was looking at scales. Massive, interlocking scales the color of old bone, each one the size of her palm, covering what appeared to be the crown of an enormous head. Maya ran. There was no strategy now, no careful conservation of energy or attention to her injured ankle. Pure survival instinct took over, flooding her system with adrenaline that let her push past pain and exhaustion. Her boots pounded against the stone and sand, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The walls of the pass blurred past her. The sunlight ahead grew brighter, closer. Behind her, the thing fully surfaced. She heard it, the cascading rush of sand falling away from a massive body, the scrape of scales against stone, and then a sound that froze her heart, even as her legs kept pumping. A hiss, long and sibilant, that echoed through the pass like steam escaping from some enormous pressure valve. It was the sound of a predator announcing itself, confident in the kill. The opening to the pass was 50 yards ahead. 40, 30. Maya's lungs burned, her vision starting to tunnel at the edges. She could hear the thing moving behind her, faster now, no longer bothering to stay beneath the surface. The scraping of scales on rock was deafening, accompanied by a heavy, rhythmic impact that she realized were footfalls. Whatever it was, it had legs. It could follow her onto the open dunes. 20 yards. 15. She burst from the mouth of the pass like a swimmer breaking the surface after too long underwater, stumbling onto the open sand as the full force of the afternoon sun hit her. She didn't stop running, angling away from the pass and up the nearest dune, sand sliding treacherously beneath her boots. Behind her, the thing emerged from the corridor of stone. Maya reached the crest of the dune and finally turned to look back. What she saw would haunt her nightmares for whatever remained of her life. The creature was serpentine, easily 40 feet long, its body thick as a barrel and covered entirely in those bone-colored scales. But it wasn't a snake. From its torso extended 6 legs, 3 on each side, each ending in massive clawed feet, adapted for digging through sand and gripping rock. The head was triangular, reptilian, with eyes that looked almost blind, filmed over with a milky white membrane. But the mouth was what held her attention. When it opened to release another one of those terrible hisses, she saw rows of teeth curved backward like hooks, designed to grip and hold prey, while the thing dragged it underground. The creature's head swung back and forth, those blind-looking eyes somehow tracking her position. Then it began to move up the dune, its 6 legs working in synchronized rhythm that let it glide across the sand with horrible efficiency. It was faster than her, much faster. Maya turned and ran down the far side of the dune, her mind desperately calculating options. The open desert stretched in every direction, nothing but dunes and heat shimmer and the occasional dark smudge that might be rock formations miles away. No shelter, no weapons that could hurt something that size. No help coming, just her, the sand, and the thing that called this place home. An idea formed, born of desperation and half-remembered lectures from her graduate studies. These creatures, if they were what she thought they were, evolved adaptations from species that hunted in underground environments. Those filmed eyes weren't blind. They were adapted for darkness, for hunting in caves and tunnels where vision was less important than other senses. In bright sunlight, the creature would be operating at a disadvantage, but that disadvantage wasn't enough to save her. She could see that now as the creature crested the dune behind her, moving with terrifying speed despite the loose sand. It was built for this environment in ways she wasn't, shaped by millions of years of evolution to be the perfect desert predator. She was just prey that had wandered into its territory. The next dune rose ahead of her, steeper than the last. Maya attacked it at an angle, using a technique she'd learned from Bedouin guides years ago, keeping her weight forward and moving in a zigzag pattern that prevented her boots from sinking too deep. The creature followed, maintaining its straight-line pursuit. It was gaining. At the crest of this dune, Maya saw something that sparked a flicker of hope. Perhaps a quarter-mile ahead, the sand gave way to a field of broken rock, the remnants of some ancient formation that had been weathered and shattered by countless years of temperature extremes. Large boulders dotted the landscape, some the size of cars, creating a maze of stone and shadow. If she could reach it, if she could get among those rocks, maybe the creature's size would work against it. She had to try. There were no other options. Maya angled her descent toward the rock field, pushing her burning legs to move faster. The creature adjusted its course to intercept her, cutting across the base of the dune with movements that threw up great plumes of sand. It would reach the rocks at the same time she did, maybe even before. The ground began to harden beneath her feet as she reached the transition zone where sand met stone. The creature was 20 yards behind her now, close enough that she could hear the rasping of its breath, that same terrible breathing sound that had first warned her in the pass. It had been tracking her all along, following her through the corridor with the patience of a predator that knew its prey couldn't escape. Maya dove between 2 massive boulders, scraping her shoulder against rough stone as she squeezed through a gap barely wide enough for her body. Behind her, the creature struck the rocks with enough force to make them shudder. She heard its claws scrabbling against stone, heard its frustrated hiss as it tried to force its bulk through an opening too small for its massive head. But the creature was learning. Instead of continuing to try the gap, it began to move around the boulder, its body flowing over and between the stones with surprising flexibility. Those 6 legs gave it stability on the uneven terrain, letting it climb and descend with an agility that seemed impossible for something so large. Maya kept moving deeper into the rock field, using every bit of cover she could find. The sun beat down mercilessly, and she was beyond thirst now, her body starting to show signs of severe dehydration. Her hands trembled as she pulled herself over a waist-high stone. Her vision kept blurring at the edges, but she couldn't stop. Stopping meant death. The creature was right behind her, sometimes so close she could smell it, a dry, dusty scent, like old bones left to bleach in the sun. It would disappear behind one set of rocks only to reappear from an unexpected angle, those milky eyes somehow tracking her movements. She realized it wasn't hunting by sight at all. It was following her heat signature, or maybe the vibrations her movements made through the stone. Either way, hiding was useless. Maya's boot caught on a crack in the rock, and she went down hard, her hands scraping across stone as she tried to catch herself. Pain flared in her already injured ankle, bright and immediate. She rolled onto her back, just as the creature's head came around the edge of a nearby boulder, its mouth opening to reveal those horrible backward curving teeth. In that moment, with death literally staring her in the face, Maya's geologist training provided one last, desperate insight. The rocks around her weren't random. They showed signs of stratification, layers that indicated sedimentary formation, which meant somewhere beneath this field there had once been water, and if there had been water, there would be caves, erosion channels carved by ancient rivers that had long since dried up and been buried beneath the sand. The creature lunged forward, and Maya threw herself to the side, rolling down a slight depression in the rock field. Her shoulder hit stone, her head bounced off a smaller rock, and then she was falling, tumbling into darkness as the ground opened up beneath her. She hit hard, the impact driving the air from her lungs. For a moment, she couldn't move, couldn't breathe, could only lie in the darkness, feeling waves of pain wash over her body. Gradually, her vision adjusted. She was in a cave, the ceiling broken open above her, where ancient stone had finally given way to her weight and the creature's attacks. Daylight streamed through the opening, illuminating a space about 15 feet across and maybe 8 feet high. Above her, she heard the creature moving, its claws scraping against stone as it tried to reach the opening. But the hole was too small, and the surrounding rock too unstable. Each time the creature pressed against the edges, more stone crumbled away, but never enough to let it through. It knew she was down here. It wasn't going to give up. Maya forced herself to sit up, taking inventory of her injuries. Her ankle was definitely worse now, swollen and throbbing. Her shoulder felt bruised but not broken. Cuts and scrapes covered her arms and face, bleeding sluggishly. But she was alive, for now. The cave extended away from the collapsed opening, tunneling into darkness. Maya pulled out the small flashlight she'd salvaged from the research station, praying its batteries still had some charge. The light flickered on, weak but functional, revealing a passageway that curved away into the earth. Above, the creature continued its assault on the opening, but the rock was holding. Maya knew she had a choice. She could stay here, waiting for the creature to either break through or give up, hoping her meager supplies would outlast the siege. Or she could explore the cave, following it deeper underground in search of another exit. Neither option was good. But staying meant certain death when her water ran out. At least in the cave system, there might be other passages, other ways to the surface. And if this had once been carved by water, there might still be moisture somewhere in the depths, trapped in pockets of porous stone or collecting in low points. Maya stood, testing her ankle and finding it would bear weight if she was careful. She took one last look at the circle of daylight above, at the shadow of the creature moving back and forth across the opening, and then turned toward the darkness. The passage was narrow, barely 3 feet wide in places, the walls rough and unfinished. She had to move sideways in some spots, her pack scraping against stone, her breathing loud in the confined space. The temperature dropped as she went deeper, a welcome relief from the surface heat. But with the coolness came a different kind of danger. Without the sun's warmth, hypothermia would become a concern when night fell. And down here, there would be no way to tell when night came except by the fading of that distant circle of light far above and behind her. After what felt like an hour but was probably only 20 minutes, the passage opened into a larger chamber. Maya swept her flashlight around, revealing a space maybe 30 feet across with a ceiling that disappeared into shadows above. The walls showed clear signs of water erosion, smooth and curved in ways that only flowing water could create. This had been an underground river once, thousands or tens of thousands of years ago, before the climate shifted and turned this region into desert. The chamber had the quality of a cathedral carved by time itself. Stalactites hung from the invisible ceiling, their tips glistening with moisture that condensed from the cooler underground air. The walls rippled with wave patterns frozen in stone, testimony to floods that had once roared through this space with enough force to carve rock. Maya ran her hand along one of these patterns, feeling the smoothness beneath her fingertips, marveling at the patient work of water over millennia. Scattered across the chamber floor were the remains of other visitors. Animal bones, bleached white and brittle, some small like desert rodents, others large enough to have belonged to gazelles or wild goats. They'd come here seeking water just as she had, but found only the dry tomb of what the cave had once been. Or perhaps they'd been washed in during flash floods, those sudden violent events that turned dry wadis into raging torrents within minutes. The desert gave and took away with equal indifference to the struggles of those caught in its grasp. In the center of the chamber, the floor dipped into a depression. Maya approached it carefully, her light playing across the surface, and felt her heart leap. Water. Not much, maybe a few gallons collected in the lowest point, but it was water. Real, liquid water. She dropped to her knees beside it, her hands shaking as she cupped the precious liquid and brought it to her cracked lips. It tasted of minerals and stone, slightly bitter but cold and wet, and absolutely miraculous. She forced herself to drink slowly, letting her body adjust to the sudden hydration. Too much too fast would make her sick. As she drank, she became aware of another sound. Not the creature above, which had finally gone silent, but something else. A faint whisper of air moving through stone, coming from a passage on the far side of the chamber. Ventilation, which meant this cave system connected to the surface somewhere else. Maya refilled her canteen from the pool, careful not to disturb the sediment at the bottom, and then moved toward the passage. Her flashlight was growing dimmer, the batteries failing, so she switched it off to conserve power and moved forward in near darkness, one hand trailing along the wall to guide her. The passage twisted and turned, sometimes climbing, sometimes descending. Time lost meaning in the darkness. Maya's world narrowed to the feel of stone beneath her hands, the sound of her breathing, the throb of her ankle with each step. She thought about the team she'd lost, colleagues who had become friends during the months in the field. She thought about the messages she'd tried to send in those first days after the attack, before her satellite phone's battery died. She thought about whether anyone was even looking for her anymore, whether they assumed she was dead, whether they'd called her parents to deliver the news. A breath of warm air touched her face, and she stopped. Fumbling in the darkness, she found her flashlight and clicked it on. The beam was almost gone now, just a faint glow, but it was enough to see that the passage ahead ended in a vertical shaft. Looking up, she could see stars. Real stars, not heat mirages or hallucinations, but actual pinpoints of light in a deep blue sky. It was evening, the sun having set while she navigated the cave system. The shaft was maybe 12 feet tall, its walls rough enough to offer handholds. Maya studied it, calculating the climb. With her injured ankle and exhausted state, it would be difficult, but possible, and more importantly, necessary. She couldn't stay in the caves. Eventually, the creature would find another entrance, would track her underground where she'd have no room to maneuver. She began to climb, wedging her boots into cracks, gripping rough stone with hands that felt like they belonged to someone else. Every muscle screamed protest. Her ankle sent lightning bolts of agony up her leg each time she put weight on it. But she climbed, foot by foot, inch by inch, until her hands finally gripped the edge of the shaft, and she hauled herself up and out onto the surface. The desert night embraced her, cold after the heat of the day. Maya lay on her back on the sand, staring up at a sky full of more stars than seemed possible, and allowed herself 1 minute of rest. Just 1 minute to let the adrenaline fade, to acknowledge the impossible fact that she'd survived. Then she sat up and took stock of her surroundings. She'd emerged on the far side of the rock field, perhaps a mile from where she'd fallen into the cave. In the distance, she could see the dark bulk of mountains, barely visible against the night sky. Mountains meant elevation changes, meant the possibility of valleys where water might collect, meant terrain that offered more options than endless dunes. She checked her compass, then remembered she'd lost it in the sandstorm. The stars would have to guide her. She found the North Star, oriented herself, and began walking. Not toward the mountains, not yet. First, she needed to put distance between herself and the creature's territory, needed to move far enough that it wouldn't pick up her trail come morning. Her ankle protested every step, but she'd learned to push through pain. Pain was just information, a signal from her body that could be acknowledged and then ignored. She focused instead on the rhythm of walking, on the feel of cool sand beneath her boots, on the stunning clarity of the desert night sky. Hours passed. The stars wheeled slowly overhead in their ancient patterns. Maya's mind drifted in and out of full consciousness, her body operating on autopilot, while her thoughts wandered through memories and half-formed plans. She thought about the creature, about how it had tracked her through the pass. She thought about the network of caves beneath the rock field, wondered how extensive they were, whether they connected to other systems. The geologist in her wanted to map them, to study the formations, to understand the hydrology that had created such features. The desert night transformed everything. Where daylight brought harsh clarity and brutal exposure, darkness offered a kind of mercy, a veil that softened the landscape's savage edges. The temperature dropped steadily, and Maya wrapped her arms around herself as she walked, generating warmth through movement. The sand beneath her boots took on different textures in the dark, sometimes firm and easy to traverse, other times loose and treacherous. She learned to read it through her feet, adjusting her stride to match the terrain she couldn't fully see. Around her, the desert night was alive with sounds most people never heard. The cooling rocks contracted, making soft pinging noises like distant wind chimes. Small creatures emerged from daytime burrows, their tiny feet whispering across the sand. Once, she heard the distinctive rattle that made her freeze in place, hand instinctively reaching for her knife. But the snake moved away, as uninterested in confrontation as she was. Everything out here was conserving energy, taking only what was needed, wasting nothing. It was a lesson her own species had forgotten in their climate-controlled comfort, but one the desert never tired of teaching. The survivor in her just wanted to keep walking. Dawn broke slowly, the sky lightening from black to deep purple to pale blue. With the sun came heat, building gradually at first, but already promising another brutal day. Maya found shelter in the shadow of a dune, using her emergency blanket to create a small reflective barrier against the direct sunlight. She rationed out water from her newly filled canteen, allowing herself only a few small sips. The pool in the cave had given her perhaps a day's reprieve, maybe two if she was extremely careful. After that, she'd be back to desperate measures, sucking moisture from desert plants or trying to catch dew in the pre-dawn hours. She dozed fitfully through the hottest part of the day, her sleep troubled by dreams of breathing sand and creatures with milky eyes. When she woke in late afternoon, her body was stiff and sore, her ankle had swollen even more, and her lips were bleeding again despite the water. But she was alive. She'd survived another day. The mountains were closer now, or maybe just clearer in the afternoon light. They rose like ancient sentinels, their peaks sharp against the sky. She thought she could see a shimmer at their base that might be vegetation, might be another mirage, only one way to find out. Maya packed her emergency blanket, took another carefully measured sip of water, and started walking again. The sand beneath her feet was still hot from the day's sun, radiating warmth through her boot soles. In a few hours, it would be cold enough to hurt. The desert was a study in extremes, life-threatening in opposite ways depending on the time of day. As she walked, she found herself thinking about the stories she'd tell if she made it out of this. The research team's fate would need to be reported. The authorities would need to know about the raiders, though she suspected they already did. Desert bandits were a constant problem in this region, preying on researchers, tourists, and remote settlements with impunity. The creature, though, that was something else. Something that probably deserved documentation, a species that had adapted to one of Earth's harshest environments in ways that pushed the boundaries of what she thought possible. But first, she had to survive. First, she had to reach those mountains, find water, find people, find any scrap of civilization that could help her get back to the world she'd come from. The world where survival meant meeting deadlines and paying bills, not outrunnering prehistoric desert predators. Night fell again, her second since entering the pass. Maya kept walking, using the stars to maintain her heading. Her ankle had gone from painful to numb, which worried her. Numbness could mean nerve damage, could mean complications that would matter enormously if she survived long enough to receive medical care. But it also meant she could walk without the constant lightning strikes of pain, so she accepted the trade-off. The landscape began to change around midnight. The dunes grew smaller, more scattered, the sand giving way to stretches of hardpan and gravel. Rocky outcroppings appeared, weathered formations that cast strange shadows in the starlight. And then, as she crested a low rise, she saw it. Lights. At first, she thought they were stars reflected in standing water, another mirage conjured by her oxygen-deprived brain. But these lights didn't waver or shift. They stayed fixed, a small cluster maybe 2 miles ahead, positioned at the base of the mountains. Maya's pace quickened despite her exhaustion. Lights meant people. People meant help, water, food, communication with the outside world. People meant survival in ways that her skills and willpower alone couldn't guarantee. The walk to the lights took nearly 2 hours, her progress slowed by the rocky terrain and her failing body. As she got closer, she could make out structures, small buildings arranged around what looked like a central courtyard. A settlement, perhaps, or a research station similar to the one that had been abandoned. She was within 100 yards when she heard voices, low and conversational, in a language she didn't immediately recognize. Then a light swept across her position, a powerful flashlight beam that pinned her in place. "Don't move!" The command came in English, accented but clear. Maya raised her hands, too exhausted to do anything but comply. "I need help," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, roughened by days of dehydration and dust. "I'm alone. No weapons except a knife." The light stayed on her for a long moment, and then she heard rapid discussion in that other language. Arabic, she realized. She was far enough north that she'd crossed into territory where Arabic was the predominant language. Figures approached, 3 of them, moving cautiously. In the flashlight beam, she could see they carried rifles, old but well-maintained. Desert guards, she guessed, protecting the settlement from exactly the kind of raiders who'd destroyed her team. The lead figure, an older man with a weathered face and sharp eyes, stopped a few paces away and studied her. He said something to his companions, then switched to English. "You are injured." "Yes," Maya confirmed. "I was with a research team 3 weeks ago. We were attacked. I've been walking since." His eyes widened slightly. 3 weeks? Impossible. "I found water," she said, swaying slightly on her feet. "Caves, underground pools." The man exchanged glances with his companions, then gestured toward the settlement. "Come, my daughter speaks better English. She will help." Maya wanted to thank him, wanted to explain everything that had happened, wanted to collapse in relief. Instead, her legs simply gave out, and she found herself falling forward onto the rocky ground. Strong hands caught her before she hit, and then the world faded to gray, then to black. She woke in a small room with whitewashed walls and a single window showing morning light. Her body ached in ways she'd forgotten were possible, every muscle protesting as she tried to sit up. Her ankle was wrapped in clean bandages, and she could smell antiseptic. An IV drip ran into her arm, replacing fluids her body desperately needed. A young woman sat in a chair near the bed reading from a tablet. She looked up when Maya moved, a smile crossing her face. "You're awake. Good. My father said you'd probably sleep for 2 days, but I thought maybe less. Where am I?" Maya's voice was still rough, but better than it had been. "Azraq Research Station. We study climate patterns and ancient weather data from the region. I'm Fatima." She set down the tablet and moved closer. "You're lucky. Another day in the desert, and you wouldn't have made it." Maya nodded slowly. "I need to make some calls. Contact authorities. Report what happened to my team." "Already done," Fatima assured her. "My father contacted the regional authorities last night. They're sending a helicopter to pick you up tomorrow, once you're stable enough to travel. They want to hear your full story." "There's something else," Maya said, struggling to organize her thoughts. "In the desert, near the rock fields south of here, there's a creature, large, reptilian, lives underground." Fatima's expression shifted, something that might have been recognition flickering across her face. "Describe it." Maya did, providing as much detail as her exhausted mind could recall. When she finished, Fatima was nodding slowly. "The old shepherds speak of such things. They call them sand dragons, though they're not dragons in any mythical sense. They're real, adapted to live in the deepest parts of the desert where no one goes. You're lucky to have escaped one." "It was hunting me," Maya said. "Deliberately hunting me through the pass." "Yes," Fatima confirmed. "That's their territory. The pass is how they move between hunting grounds. You interrupted it." Maya lay back against the pillows, processing this information. So the creature was known, at least to locals. That made it real in a way that her exhausted mind had struggled to accept. Not a hallucination born of dehydration and desperation, but an actual species that had evolved to dominate one of Earth's harshest environments. "I want to go back," she said suddenly. "Not now, but eventually. I want to study it properly, Document it. Understand it. Fatima smiled. Of course you do. You're a scientist. But for now you rest. Let your body heal. The desert isn't going anywhere, and neither are the sand dragons. Maya closed her eyes, feeling the pull of exhaustion despite the sleep she'd already had. Her body needed time to recover from 3 weeks of survival at the edge of human endurance. But already, her mind was working, planning future expeditions, designing research protocols, imagining what might be learned from studying a species that could thrive where humans barely survived. The clean sheets felt alien against her skin after weeks of sand and grit. The softness of the mattress seemed excessive, almost uncomfortable, after nights spent on hard rock or shifting dunes. Her body had adapted to hardship with surprising efficiency, and now the comfort felt like a betrayal of that adaptation, a reminder that the person who had entered that desert pass 3 weeks ago no longer existed. She'd been burned away by sun and fear and desperation, refined down to something harder and sharper. The woman who emerged wasn't quite the same person who'd been taking survey measurements that morning when the raiders came. She thought about her team members, tried to remember their faces clearly. Dr. Hassan, who'd supervised the project, always calm even when equipment failed or supplies ran low. Jennifer, fresh from her doctorate, enthusiastic about every rock sample and water reading. Marcus, the quiet technician who kept their instruments running through sandstorms and equipment failures. Were they really all gone? Had anyone else escaped the attack? She'd never know unless the authorities found evidence at the site, and by now the desert would have reclaimed everything, burying the camp under new dunes, scattering equipment across miles of wasteland. Survivor's guilt was a weight she hadn't expected. Why her? Why had she been the one far enough away to escape? Pure chance. The random fortune of drawing the early survey shift that morning. But random or not, the weight remained. She'd survived, which meant she carried their stories now, their work, their purpose. The research couldn't die with them. The water mapping project mattered too much for communities struggling with drought across the region. Someone had to finish what they'd started. The desert had tried to kill her. It had taken her team, driven her to the brink of death, and shown her things she'd never imagined possible. But it had also revealed its secrets, proven that even in the harshest places, life found ways to persist and adapt. She thought about the creature breathing beneath the sand, about the network of caves holding precious water, about the way survival stripped everything down to its essential elements: pain, thirst, fear, determination, hope. When she woke again, it was evening, and the window showed a sky painted in shades of orange and purple. Fatima was gone, replaced by her father, who sat quietly reading a worn book. He looked up when she stirred. "The helicopter comes at dawn," he said. "They will take you to the hospital in the capital. Good doctors there." "Thank you," Maya said, "for helping me. I don't know if I said that last night." He waved it off. "This is the desert. We help each other or we die alone. It is the only way." He paused, studying her face. "Fatima says you want to come back, to study the creature." "Yes." "It is dangerous." "I know." He smiled faintly. "Then you are braver than most, or more foolish. In the desert, sometimes it is hard to know which." That night, Maya slept deeply and without nightmares for the first time in weeks. When the helicopter arrived at dawn, she was stable enough to travel, her injuries treated, and her body beginning the long process of recovery. As the aircraft lifted off, banking away from the research station and toward the mountains, she looked back at the desert spread out below. From this height, it looked peaceful, almost beautiful. Golden dunes rolling into the distance, rock formations casting long shadows in the early morning light. Nothing suggested the danger and terror that lurked beneath that serene surface. Nothing showed the creature breathing beneath the sand, or the network of caves holding ancient water, or the countless ways the desert found to test those who entered its domain. But Maya knew. She'd walked through that beauty and survived its brutality. She'd heard the sand breathing behind the rocks and lived to tell the tale. And though she was leaving now, heading toward civilization and safety and all the comforts of the modern world, she knew she'd be back. The desert still had secrets to reveal, and now she knew how to listen for them, how to read the signs, how to survive long enough to learn what it had to teach. The breathing sand had tried to end her story. Instead, it had just given her a new beginning. If you want more stories from the desert, Subscribe to Dark Desert Survival. Have you ever heard something in nature that made you question everything you thought you knew? Tell me in the comments what moment of Maya's journey shocked you the most. Was it the creature's first appearance, the fall into the caves, or her determination to return and study what nearly killed her?